For more insights, Allan Behm, Senior Advisor of the International and Security Affairs Program at the Australia Institute, joins us live. Allan, thanks for making the time to speak with us. I wanted to get your initial reaction to these contradictory statements. Donald Trump announcing a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, Tehran's foreign minister disputing this completely. What do you read into this?
The situation, of course, Rani, in the Middle East is incredibly fluid. It's very, very unstable. And so we have President Trump, who thinks he can create a ceasefire by proclamation, and yet the two countries that must be party to a ceasefire, if the people of both Iran and Israel are to be safe, have not come to the table at this point. So we're in a fog, really. We don't know whether there's a ceasefire or not. President Trump thinks there is, but neither of the two parties thinks there is. So there's a huge question mark over the future stability of the Middle East right at the moment.
Who do you think needs to get involved to help secure this ceasefire? We've been reading that the Qatari prime minister was involved and had called Iran. But again, as you said, everything's up in the air. We don't really know what's happening on the ground.
And of course, interestingly, Iran responded to the US attack by firing a rocket into Qatar itself. So exactly where Qatar stands in this at the moment is also, I think, up in the air. For it to find some measure of resolution, clearly the United States now has a role in it. The United States created a role for itself when it attacked Iran on the weekend. Clearly, Israel has a role in this, as does Iran. And so at some point, those three countries have got to come to the table and decide what the next steps are going to be. And evidently, at this point, nobody has taken a decision to do anything at all except to maintain the status quo, which is uncertainty and the exchange of rockets.
You mentioned that Iran's retaliatory attack on that U.S. airbase was in Qatar. What are your thoughts on this strike? How significant was it, or was it not significant at all?
Look, it is significant because it was a demonstration of an Iranian response to the very preponderant attack of the United States. So clearly the politics of it are straightforward. Iran had to make some kind of response, and we understand that Iran signalled its response ostensibly to ensure that it didn't kill any Americans in firing a rocket to the Al Udeid air base. But equally, I think the amount of damage that was incurred there was minimal. So it was, if you like, a strategic gesture rather than an all-out response to what the United States had launched on Sunday.
Iran's foreign minister has said that it will stop its strikes if Israel does the same. From your point of view, who stands to benefit at this point from securing a ceasefire?
I think both sides will stand to benefit from a ceasefire. Clearly, Iran has been able to inflict some damage on Israel, and the citizens of Israel are not accustomed to that. We do know from the Israeli media that there is a lot of upset and a lot of uncertainty, both at being attacked by Iran, but also of having attacked Iran in order to cause those attacks to come by way of retaliation. So it would be in the interests of both sides to stop firing rockets at each other, as it would be in the interests of the United States to broker some kind of peace agreement between the two sides, just to cut the amount of suffering that's being inflicted on their populations.
The whole point of Israel's initial attack on Iran, and the U.S. also joining the conflict, was to stop Tehran from producing a nuclear weapon. Now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said Israel is close to achieving this goal, but do we have any evidence of this? And what do we know exactly about Iran's nuclear capabilities?
Look, we do know a fair bit about Iran's nuclear capability, and on all of the information publicly available to people like you and me, Rani, it would appear that Iran is on the way to being able to develop nuclear weapons. It has a long way to go yet, though, from the 60% enrichment that it apparently has achieved to the 90% enrichment of beneficiated uranium that it would need for a nuclear weapon. So the IAEA has made a statement to the effect that Iran is currently in breach of its obligations by way of reporting, but it has made no statement about how far Iran has gone in the actual manufacture of nuclear weapons. So I think the best we can assess at this point is that Iran does have an intention to create nuclear weapons. It is not yet able to deliver on that intention. Israel is, of course, very concerned that if Iran does acquire a nuclear weapon, it will then match Israel's possession of nuclear weapons. And the United States, at least President Trump, declares that Iran is not all that far away from being able to do it. But in all of this, we're dealing with a total quagmire of information. Nobody knows for certain what's happening. There seems to be a lot of disinformation around. And so in those sorts of circumstances, absolutely the best thing that can happen is that there is a ceasefire and that all parties withdraw to the negotiation table in order to clarify what kind of a future they all want to share.
So even if they do come to a ceasefire, what has to happen for the two sides to forge a more long-term resolution to their decades-old conflict? How do we go along that path?
Well, yeah. This is the huge question, because it is a decades-long conflict. There is no trust between any of the parties that are engaged in this conflict. And of course, the first thing you've got to do is to build trust, the trust that people will keep their word and will refrain from firing missiles at each other. So the first thing that I think really does need to happen is that some kind of a ceasefire has to be brokered and monitored. And I think that the role of the international community here will become very important, because any ceasefire will need to be inspected and monitored, and that is a role for the United Nations, a particularly legitimate one, and it's the sort of role that the international community should be proposing both to the United Nations in the Security Council and proposing to the three parties that are currently engaged, the United States, Israel and Iran. So those early steps need to be taken first.
Are you confident that those steps can be taken, though? Do you think the three sides will come to the negotiating table if they haven't already?
Frankly, Rani, I'm not. I'm not confident that those steps will be taken, because what we're dealing with here is a very complicated exchange between powers. This is not at heart a security issue. At heart, it is a power issue. It is the power of the United States, the power of Iran, and the power of Israel. And until the leaders of those three countries are prepared to say, we're transforming this into a security negotiation, not a power contest, nothing can be done. And I'm not hopeful at this point that Ayatollah Khamenei, Prime Minister Netanyahu or President Trump have reached the point where they truly want to enhance the security of their people rather than demonstrate their national power. That is the problem.
Thank you, Allan, for sharing your insights with us. We were speaking to Allan Behm, Senior Advisor of the International and Security Affairs Program at the Australia Institute.